Welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Annie Cole. Before his inauguration anniversary speech on May 20th, President Lai Ching-te used a merger analogy to describe cross-strait relations, emphasizing that if China wants to annex Taiwan, it should propose the terms. Now, the statement has sparked widespread attention and interpretation. A Taiwan electronic news poll showed nearly 50% of respondents believe that China should proactively propose the terms for reunification. Against the backdrop of escalating U.S.-China tensions, how should we interpret President Lai's merger analogy? And how should Taiwan handle its relations with the U.S. and China after the call between Trump and Xi Jinping without a zero-sum approach? Joining us today are Leonard Chao, National Tsinghua University Adjunct Professor, and Vincent Chao, Democratic Progressive Party Taipei City Councilors. Welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Thank you.
So first, I would like to ask, President Lai's recent statement on a social media channel compared cross-strait relations to, like I mentioned earlier, a merger analogy, saying that China is the larger company here and Taiwan is the smaller one. So if you want to acquire my company, you should set the terms, not Taiwan. So Leonard, we'll start from you. From your perspective, how do you view this analogy?
Well, okay, honestly, it's quite a pleasant surprise, at least for me, as far as I'm concerned, when I first heard these words coming from a gentleman who has been known as a so-called Taiwan independence worker, and then although we have known that some the opposition party figures, even some of the DPP colleagues came up with some criticism and comment on the Lai's words. I would like to, on the contrary, compliment him for being creative and innovative. Okay, if not. Although a bit provocative, at least he provides some new thought instead of repeating those cliche unification, independence. So that's the first point. And secondly, nevertheless, I would like to, if I may, suggest to Lai that he mentioned, as you have referred to, that large company set up the terms, not small companies. I would like to, with no offense, to suggest that small company is also entitled to setting terms. Because merger, by definition, is kind of a combination of the working together of two entities, of two companies. It's not like acquisition. Okay. Acquisition is one is taking over the other. So if you would define this to be a merger, well, both are on equal footing. So small company also has the right, I repeat, has the right to set up terms as equal as a large company. It doesn't matter the size, okay? Both are on equal footing. That's my humble suggestion. But finally, I would like to say that the timing, is very good, as you mentioned about the Xi and Trump call recently, and I think although this time around, Xi Jinping brought up the Taiwan issue, and Trump did not respond directly. Obviously, in the next round of their meeting or a phone call, Xi Jinping definitely is going to put the Taiwan issue on the table.
On the table.
So now, at this moment, that the President Lai brought up the new concept, new idea to show our our bottom line or our idea. So I think that will at least educate Trump of the United States with some new idea. So don't take Taiwan for granted.
Vincent, were there some disputes within the DPP?
I'm not sure how many disputes there were, but I think there's a consensus that it's good to jump outside the box, and it's good to offer, I think, new ways of not only describing the situation Taiwan is in, but also, I think, marking some important realities, which is the fact that if you look at President Lai's comments in terms of this being essentially two companies, I mean, this is right. I mean, this is what we've been saying all along, that the status quo right now is that the Republic of China, Taiwan's formal name, is a sovereign independent country, and we're not part of the PRC. And this is exactly what this two companies analogy drives at. But I do think if you look at very closely what President Lai actually said in Chinese, there's a lot of nuance there. For example, this talk about merger versus acquisition. If you look at the Chinese, it's not exactly a merger. It's 你要并我公司, which is that if you want to acquire this company, then you have to raise essentially conditions. And the idea is there's two parts that are important to this. The first part is that we have to recognize that this is China trying to proactively change the status quo, which, if we use this analogy, is two companies. It's China that wants to change it and become one larger company. So therefore, I think the onus is on China to essentially talk to the Taiwanese people about what it wants and why it wants this, and make the case. And so far, obviously, they've been very unsuccessful in that respect. But there's also another component to that, which is that aside from this idea, we also understand that both sides have to talk. And Taiwan has been open to talk. I mean, President Lai, since his inauguration speech, has been very clear. I mean, let's find ways that are non-political, non-controversial in nature, education, tourism, and try to build a positive feedback cycle from there. So I do think that there's a lot of nuance if you look at the details of what President Lai has spoken about. But the overall framework, I think, is a reaffirmation of the status quo and the present state of realities, which is that, yes, again, Taiwan, formerly called the Republic of China, is a sovereign independent country.
So do you think that based on saying this merger, as we translate directly to English, do you think Lai is also reframing independence and also unification? And do you also think that Taiwan at this point in time is also aligning a little bit towards the U.S. position?
So I'll be honest with you. I don't even think this unification versus independence framework is really relevant sort of in the political context we see today. I mean, no major political party has come out for either of the two ideas. I mean, unification, I think the Taiwanese people have firmly shown again and again, particularly through, for example, the National Tsing University polls, that this is no market here in Taiwan. And independence, as in a formal change to the constitution and change to the Republic of China, I think likewise. So I think the vast majority of where the Taiwanese public is at the status quo. And I do think framing this as part of this unification versus independence debate does it a bit of a disservice by blurring that nuance. And we have to understand that this framework, this analogy that President Lai brought forward, I think perfectly captures the present state of realities, which is, again, that status quo.
And Ambassador, what is your view on this?
Well, that's a long story because I'm always not very high on the relying on the U.S. market and in terms of the trade. Of course, one thing, but the policy-wise, we have been leaning too much, unnecessarily too much, on the U.S. decision. I would like to say that because as a former foreign service officer, I found that nothing to do with the party affiliation. But if we deal with the U.S., we have to learn to sometimes to say no or to provide some different option by reasoning with the United States, reasoning with Uncle Sam, not being so gullible to a U.S. the instruction. So I'd like to maybe elaborate more later on the next question.
But when you say reasoning with the U.S. right now under Trump's administration, do you think that reasoning with Trump?
Well, okay, we're dealing. Okay, I presume that our colleagues in Washington, I don't know if they can have the access to Trump personally.
Right.
At least they can, when they deal with on a daily basis, State Department or in the NSC, National Security Council in the White House, they have to, they have to reason with them because now it's one thing it's worth our attention. Trump's is not necessarily go hand in hand with the establishment people, like the State Department or the White House staff. Trump has his personal agenda. Although those, the government, agencies, they have their policy, orientation or follow the tradition. However, Trump, is a very unique, unorthodox kind of leader. So when you deal with those government agency people, their agenda, their policy, follow the status quo. I think maybe they're not necessarily, will be open to our suggestion. But at least you can try. I don't know if that's reliable source or not, but we keep saying yes to the Washington, words. I hope it's not right because it's definitely unbelievable. Because the U.S. will come up with some respect for someone who can say no to Uncle Sam instead of say yes.
Okay.
I want to jump in on that. Obviously, Ambassador Chao has served in the U.S. before under a different time period, under a different context. I've served in the United States myself, including during President Trump's first term. And I do think that we have to be smart in terms of how we think about this issue. And smart in the sense of this, that every country, ultimately is going to look out for their own self-interest. That's just how countries do. This is what their taxpayers have paid them to do, essentially. And so for us, it's important to find those areas of mutual common interest with the United States. And that's precisely what we've done over the past couple of years. And that means putting Taiwan's interests first, but also working with U.S. interests to find those commonalities so we can make joint progress. For example, I have no doubt in my mind that for the United States, one of their top priorities is the maintenance of the status quo. They don't want to see war across the Taiwan Strait. And guess what? That aligns perfectly with us. So there's a lot of work that we're going to have to do in terms of preventing war and conflict from ever breaking out across the Taiwan Strait, including, for example, the defense budget, including defense procurement, including defense strategy, including information sharing. There's a whole host of issues there. And that, I think, goes on the same for a variety of different issues. Now, obviously, the economy and trade is going to be a little bit dicey right now, with President Trump's, interests and priorities maybe a bit different from the rest of the world. But certainly, I think if we put that aside and we look solely on the security and the regional security angle, I think the commonalities are, astronomical. And so this idea that we keep saying yes to everything, we say yes to cooperation. That's the key point. And we're going to put our interests first. We're going to want to see kind of cooperation that makes sense for us and for them. But we're going to put that interest first because ultimately it's about Taiwan's survival. It's about the U.S.-Taiwan relationship. It's about all of that. So I just wanted to add a bit of context to that point that, it's not about just writing blank checks and saying yes all the time, but it's about finding those commonalities and saying, yes, let's go ahead and move, full speed forward on them.
Well, okay, don't get me wrong. Given my 2 terms working in Washington, I came out with a lot of friends. I recall when I first was posted to Washington, that's shortly after the diplomatic breakup between the Taiwan and U.S. And my senior colleagues in MOFA told me that better not to be assigned in the political session. That's which we are both, and that would be very unpopular. Shortly after the breakup, better to work in the congressional leader office. Unfortunately, I was posted in trade session, but I deal with State Department and Taiwan desk and so on and so forth. As a result, I come out, I really appreciate their friendship. Like Richard Bush, that's one of my first friends, and Doug Paul, and Doug, and also the Stephen Young. They're also my longtime friends. In the looking back in retrospect, I found them very, 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 gratifying. But what I want to emphasize that sometimes, take one thing for example, whenever the U.S. in Washington, certain individual congressman, senator came up with some words or compliment about Taiwan, or they like to propose a bill, like in lifting up the Taiwan's Congress office level, and then the congressman's words is a sense of Congress. It's hardly
it's not legally binding.
That's right, not binding at all. According to our experience, okay, we appreciate that. And then, but some of the media, some of the Taiwan, politicians, they came up with a high compliment. Okay, we're great for this and that. Fine, that's good, I agree. But sometimes when the U.S., particularly under the current leadership, they came up with random words about Taiwan. If those same words were used for some other country, that would spark some backlash from those countries. But with Taiwan, we keep quiet. That I found it incomprehensible. When our people, our friend in the community, international community, they compliment us, we send them back. We express our appreciation, fine. But when they came up with unfair and unreasonable comment or criticism of Taiwan, we have to shout back.
Okay, I'm curious though, do you have an example of that?
With some diplomatic language, of course. We're not shouting, we're not quarreling with them, but you can come up with some diplomatic language to show some your displeasure.
Right, gentlemen. So this is something I also wanted to point out, and echoing to what Ambassador said earlier. I think there's a little bit of change with the Taiwan attitude right now. As we know, more than 50% of Taiwan's trade is with countries outside of the U.S. and China. So President Lai said, in the past, we didn't put all of our eggs in China's basket. And guess what? in the future, we're also going to put all of our bags in America's basket as well. Before I move back to Ambassador Vincent, what do you think exactly, if we move back to Taiwan's point of view and interest instead of the U.S., how do you interpret President Lai underlying strategy or any diversification strategy on there?
Just a quick point. President Lai said was that we won't put all of our eggs in China's basket, and then we also won't put all of our eggs in America's basket either. And I think that's the point, which is we've been pursuing this idea of trade diversification for about the past decade or so. And I think in the outset we had a lot of challenges. I mean, Taiwan's economy was so intertwined with China's. Over 40% of our trade, both inbound and outbound, went to China and Hong Kong. I think the highest amount was about 42, 43%. This was about 8-9 years ago. And certainly we've seen things come down dramatically since. So we're now in the 30% range. We've seen investments, I think, diversified to Southeast Asia and other countries. We've seen trade flows shift. We see secure supply chains being established. And so trade diversification essentially means that we're going to look out for Taiwan. And Taiwan is best served when our trade, I think we're trading robustly with countries all over the world.
Exactly.
In terms of the United States, we've been very, very clear in terms of that strategy. I mean, if there's any doubt, look through this Bloomberg opinion piece that President Lai had put out a few weeks earlier. And it stated very clearly, I think, how we're going to approach trade with the U.S., which is that the U.S. is a very, very important economic partner. And because of its security importance, we're going to manage trade, obviously, right. And we're going to manage trade carefully. And as a result, in response to this tariff plan that President Trump has put out, we've had a bunch of measures that we've, I think, counter response with, including, for example, further trade investment with the United States, working on secure supply chains, working on investment linkages. I mean, there's a whole host of measures there. And I do think that from what we see out of D.C. and other places, that these measures have been quite well received. So again, I do think that on the whole, on a holistic perspective, we're going to manage trade as we've always been on this idea of diversification. But with the United States in particular, I mean, this is sort of outside the trade, general trade framework that we see right now. But we're going to manage it carefully, and we're going to manage it in a way that makes the most sense for not only Taiwan's economic and trade interests, but our security ones as well.
Okay, so when you said that we're going to manage it carefully, can you elaborate a little bit more on this? Because economically speaking, the U.S. might have a different role from the rest of the countries, because security-wise, we also depend a little bit more on the U.S. here more than we do on other countries. And right now, it's also under Trump administration. So there's a lot of uncertainties going on. So when we deal or handle this carefully, can you elaborate more on that?
Well, a couple points. The first one is, and you mentioned precisely that word, which is uncertainties. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of uncertainties, and our job is to reduce those uncertainties. And one thing we've done to reduce those uncertainties very, very clearly is to show that we have a strong willingness to work with the U.S. to resolve these questions and these concerns that they've had on trade. And so it's an attitude, and we've shown that attitude very clearly, which means that we're going to be one of the first kind of through the door. We're going to be one of the first to sit down on the table and to find ways of moving past that. But the second part of that is also an acknowledgement that trade and security oftentimes go hand in hand. So we're going to approach trade issues with the holistic relationship in mind. So there are countries around the world that can have high tariffs, for example, and just say on the outset that, it's okay. I mean, we don't do a lot of trade with the United States. We're just going to, bite the belt and see what happens. We have a lot at stake here. We have a lot of trade with the U.S. We have a $72.9 billion trade surplus. We have almost all of our arms procurement coming from the United States. Right. So there's a lot at play. And so any negotiation and discussions have to take that into account. And then the third part is this. I do think that Taiwan and the U.S., when it comes to trade, people are going to find ways of working together because there's too much complementarity. If you talk about this industrial renaissance that President Trump wants to promote in the United States, I mean, so much of advanced manufacturing nowadays, cannot take place without Taiwanese expertise, without Taiwanese technology. You're talking about chips, that's essential to everything these days. I mean, there's a lot of complementarity. So there's a lot of potential for this trade deal or this trade discussion to work out well.
So, Ambassador, echoing to what Vincent said earlier, do you also believe that we can leverage these advantages of ours and to finally break free, and also at the same time to be a little bit less passive than we were before and right now become the player in the game? Sure.
Well, I agree. First of all, I agree with what the President Lai said, the statement on the eggs and basket, theory. I 100% agree that not to single out in a certain country too much resource, too much trade on that one a single country. Instead, I don't want to repeat what has been discussed. Maybe here, if I may sincerely contribute, maybe two words, 2D, double D. That's about talking about the long-term and underlying strategy for Taiwan's trade, external trade. That two words might be helpful. One is the diversification, diverse the industry, diverse the industrial development. Now everyone can agree that we have seen that we have been focusing too much on the IT, related the business, like TSMC.
Right.
Okay, there was one high mountain supporting Taiwan stock market, and that's the only one. We should create a similar more industry like this one. Okay, the diversification is one thing, but second is decentralization. Meaning what? Meaning decentralize, the market, not to rely on the U.S. market, and neither on the Chinese mainland market. Now I think we have done a lot, in the past few years since the South, with the South Asian bond, policy has been taking place since President Tsai's, administration. I am teaching, some university about some of the Southeast Asian countries, the students. So the market should be decentralized, not only those two powers, but also in Southeast Asia. Now even Europe has drawn more attention, I think more interest recently, because since the Trumps were coming, the U.S. U.S. and Europe relations has been turning sour, and Russia and the Europe has been turning around to see China could be more open, and also Taiwan. We can take the right, to help, to welcome, the European business to work closely than ever before with Taiwan.
And Vincent, your take on this?
No, I mean, I agree to a certain extent. I mean, diversification is important. We talked about that. The U.S., I mean, just coming back to this for one quick minute. I mean, we look at the $72.9 billion trade surplus, and it's astronomical. It's absolutely unimaginable. But the fact is that this was a dramatic increase from 30 billion just a few years ago, meaning that trade flows have increased exponentially between Taiwan and the U.S. But still right now, I mean, our largest trading partner, top three trading partners include China, include Japan, include the United States, and actually to a certain extent include Europe as well. So my point being is that, yes, Taiwan's focus is on all of these trading partners, but at the same time, it's important not to rely too much on any one of them. And I think that's precisely the goal we've been pursuing. Yeah.
And right now, we talk a little bit more about Taiwan's strategy. And also based on what Ambassador mentioned earlier, the two words diversification and also decentralization, which we've been talking about for the past few minutes. But I wanted to move back to this merger analogy that we were talking about at the very beginning of the show. I wanted to hear what gentlemen have to say. What do you think that China could propose? Do you think that they could actually propose terms for negotiation with Taiwan? Do you think that's possible, Vincent?
I'll put it this way. There's a certain kind of path forward on any issue, for example, for acquisitions or mergers. The first step must be you have to talk. I mean, if companies are going to talk about acquisitions or mergers or anything similar to that, unless it's a hostile takeover, which is probably another analogy for today, but unless it's a hostile takeover, people actually have to talk to understand where balance sheets are, to understand where expectations are, and so forth. So I think first things first, people have to start talking to each other.
How do they initiate?
You mean M&As in general? Again, I do think that people are going to look at balance sheets, they're going to look at shareholder expectations, and they're going to look at what they can put forward. And I think there's a certain process to it, and that process must always begin with really talking. Again, unless it's a hostile takeover. And so I think that's the most sorely lacking part right now. And again, the DPP administration, contrary to what many people in opposition have said, has always been open to talking without preconditions. As long as people don't insist to say we have to agree on A, B, C, and D, and E before talks can even take place, I think a DPP administration's attitude would be like, let's talk. Let's sit down. Let's have dinner. Let's, as President Lai was fond of saying earlier, love to take him to, these great restaurants in Taiwan because there's so much food that we can sit down and talk over. So talking is step one. And then the second part, I think, is an acknowledgement of China's intentions over Taiwan. And these intentions have to be accompanied by a realistic understanding that Taiwan is a democracy, and that decisions are going to be made not by the government of Taiwan, but the people of Taiwan, as shown again and again by democratic elections. So whatever the Chinese say and do have to resonate with the people of Taiwan. That's precisely what's not happening right now.
And as we know that Xi and President Trump just had a phone call, do you think that after this phone call or this gesture, there actually could be a game changer a little bit here? And, you know, like based on the merger analogy that President Lai mentioned earlier, what kind of response do you think China is going to have? Or do you think China will be acting a little bit differently from before?
I'm not sure if China would be acting more differently. Well, again, back to the talk. Whenever I make a speech, I say let's talk, straight talk. You know, the pound, two-word meaning. Straight talk between the Beijing and Taipei. Yes, to make the long story short, when I was traveling in mainland China, I spoke to the Chinese mainland people that would like to you should change your mindset. You should you should modify your traditional very narrow-minded which is helping no one. Your military drill. Over the past few years since Nancy Pelosi's visit around the island, and also your harsh words, once in a while, they are detrimental to Taiwan people's, the sentiment toward mainland China.
All right, thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. If you like our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you all for watching our show today. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time.